Well, good day. Today on Carl's Conviction, voter fraud, the mystical boogeyman that plagues the U.S. Throughout the last presidential campaign, then candidate Donald Trump complained about massive voter fraud in this country. He even went as far as to say that he would only accept the outcome of the election if he won. Well, guess what? He did. He won. And you know what? He's still not accepting it. He's not accepting that he lost the popular vote. Since taking office, President Trump has called for a major investigation into voter fraud, claiming that 3 to 5 million voted illegally in the last election. Coincidentally, the same amount that he lost the popular vote by, about 3 million. What is his proof? His proof of this? Well, quote, when you see people that are registered in 2 states, when you see other things, when you see illegals, he goes on to say, a lot of people have come out and said that I am correct. Well, who are these people? I just have the 2 questions, just 2 questions for you. One, who are these mysterious unnamed people that say you are right? Are they the same people that say you're right all the time? Maybe they do exist. I'd just like to know who they are. And 2, you're going to blame illegals. Really? Illegal immigrants to the country. All right, so let me entertain that for a minute. And let's say that we accept the number of about 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country, which is about what is thought and about what is compared to it being correct. And we take out of that 11 million that about 10 million of them are of voting age and could possibly pass for a voter. Now, do you really think that across 50 states, that 50% of them found somebody on their voter rolls they could impersonate and went down to their polling place and risked deportation just to vote for Hillary Clinton? I mean, come on! Not only that, but let's also ask why, if this is a massive voter fraud that happened, why weren't the Democrats smart enough to put some of those 3 to 5 million illegal votes into the 4 states they lost by 77,000? Just a thought. Now, getting back to the serious side, the president is correct. Yeah, I did say that. Don't adjust your sets. The president is correct in saying that millions of Americans are registered in 2 or more states. That is a correct statement. According to the Pew Center, there are about 2.7 million Americans that are registered to vote in 2 or more states. However, there are over 200 million registered voters in the U.S. And that means duplicates only account for about 1.35% of the total voting pool. Now, yet despite that small percentage, a Target Smart study showed that only about 0.0005% of the more than 83 million votes cast in the 2014 election were from people who voted more than once. That is a problem, but it's not a big problem. The study also showed, though, that both Democrats and Republicans committed this type of potential fraud at the same rate. Now, this renders the president's claim that the entire illegal vote went to Secretary Clinton completely false. If anything, he picked up some of it. And we know that in this last election, there was a voter in Iowa that voted twice for Donald Trump. Now, the president's claim of widespread in-person voter fraud are just not true. They're just not true. However, there are glaring issues with our voting system in this country, and they should be addressed. Currently, every state has its own laws on voter registration and conducts its own voter registration process. This data is kept within the state and is very rarely shared with other state governments. This leads to the issue of multi-state enrollments and other potential issues and irregularities on voter registrations. In a day and age of computing and information sharing, we ought to be able to set up a system that tracks and ensures less duplicacies and errors in our system. Now, voter registration systems do indeed need to be updated and tweaked. It should be a uniformed process across the United States, in my opinion, and ensure that all citizens have the ability to vote freely and easily. But to say that voter fraud is rampant in our country is just simply not true. Now, there's also never a reason why a lawful registered citizen should not be allowed the ability to voice their opinion and vote. That is the important part of this. We must make sure votes happen and people are engaged, and that voter suppression through the idea of whether it be anything out there or voter fraud as our scariness must not take place. We must encourage people to vote, we must encourage people to get involved, and we must ensure that our system of representative democracy remains strong. Thank you for listening to Carl's Convictions today. Don, your thoughts on this matter?
Well, Carl, I'm gonna say that the people telling Trump that that there's voter fraud out there, that his imaginary friends inside his tiny little brain, that simply cannot comprehend that he might possibly have lost his, the popular vote. I also want to point out to you that being registered to vote in more than one place is not illegal. That's not illegal. Casting more than one vote is illegal, but being registered, you could be registered in all 50 states. And this is actually true for a lot of people, say you grew up in Arizona and then you moved to Nevada and then you moved to New York and all these places and you ended up being registered to vote in all these places. That doesn't go away. You're still registered to vote in those places, but if you only cast your vote where you're living or in one place, that's not illegal. The other thing I want to point out is that you want to update the voting system to come into the 21st century with the digital age. I actually am against this. I like that the states have different laws pertaining to this. There's early vote, there's mail-in ballots, there's places that do closed-loop electronics, some do punch cards, some do fill in the bubble. I like that each state has its own different rules and different ways of tabulating votes, because that prevents the very thing that Donald Trump seems to think is happening. It prevents an overall scheme of fraud in our voting system, because while you could in one state be able to fix the system in a certain way because you know all the rules there, but the rules are completely different from state to state to state, and this keeps a wide net of fraud from happening across the United States. Whereas everything goes to computer, suddenly that's not such a sure thing, as we've seen many places of high technology, Samsung, Yahoo, these are all places that have been broken into, and you can't ensure that the voting system is completely safe once you take it online into the 21st century. Until you can 100% guarantee that safety, I would actually be more preferable to the system that we currently have, which is offline and different from state to state.
The thing that I would say, just kind of stepping back, number one, I'm not advocating for the state governments to change or not be in control of how their voting happens. I actually want that to continue to place. What I'm referring to in this situation is, and you are correct, that being registered in multiple states is not illegal. It's the idea of voting in both states that would be. But the idea of a shared voter roll is what I'm looking on. Not so much of how people are voting in the state, not so much of where they need to go or when early voting is. I actually think we need more early voting. I think we need more mail-in voting. I think we need to have more polling places on election days, because we have to make it easy for people to vote. And those are the things that do. But what I'm saying is that we have a nationwide voter registration roll of the populace that lives here, etc. And that can be maintained in some way. How that is, I don't know. I'm not here to talk about how that plan gets fulfilled. But each state still contains its own independence on how it will vote and how it does not. But yet it has its own voter rolls and voter information that is shared across the federal right, or not federal registry is the wrong word, but against the United States system, so that everybody sees what's on there. And also through that database, you can look at irregularities that might happen more quickly. And that's something that becomes challenging right now, because even if there's an actual claim of those 0.0005% of people in 14, that equates to probably about 11, I think it was like 40,000 votes in that election, which very small out of the 48 million. Tiny, yeah, tiny. But the point behind that is that some of them, when they were going to look them up, the staffing at the states just didn't allow that, because there wasn't enough man hours to figure out whether there were actually duplicates or what could have possibly happened. And that's kind of my idea of trying to figure out how we can get the systems together to work for that. And that's kind of what I was referring to in that particular regard.
I don't want there to be a federal registration of voters. I like the states to have the voters, because let's be perfectly honest, most of the voting that people do, or most of the things that people vote on, are by state, by county, by city that they live in. So having a federal registration would only be for the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency. And I just don't, and even then, you'd have to also account for the fact that people are registered for certain parties and vote in certain parties, and even the parties don't have the same rules from state to state. So a federal database doesn't seem to be the way it should work for me. The one thing I will say that does make sense is that have the state roles and then have the state governments talk to one another about this would make much more sense than a federal list of registered voters, in my mind.
Ultimately, what ends up happening, though, if you're going to talk, they can't constantly track who moves in, who moves out. That doesn't work that way. But if we share across the idea of that data for the base of what's going on there, then all that database collected becomes from a 50-state database. We could call it federal, we can call it not, because it's not really about the registration. Still stays at the local state level. But the data for who is doing that can be cross-referenced at a national level, is my idea behind that. And it doesn't infringe on any of those state rights. It just helps to kind of keep in my mind some of this challenge of multiple people being registered out there. Now, of course, as many of you also probably know, Donald Trump says this, that he doesn't want that multiple people being registered as a precursor for voter fraud. And, of course, he doesn't seem to want to take into account that several members of his own administration, as well as his own daughter, are registered in multiple states. So that's kind of, in its own sense, a little bit challenged of that particular claim, even off the bat on face value to there. So
getting into a political understanding of what's going on, why is the president even talking about this? He won the election. Why even bother bringing up the fact that he thinks it was fraudulent? He's only making only delegitimizing his own presidency. Why would anyone do that? I have thought about this over and over again. There is no political gain for bringing this up. All this does is bring it back into the limelight, into the news. It just brings it back into the news, where if he'd stopped talking about it, and if he never talked about it, 24 hours later it's gone and we never hear about it again, because it's not a news story. But it is a news story because he's still talking about it. Why, Carl? Can you think of any reason at all someone would still talk about this?
I can. And this is, I think, a narrative that we're going to kind of flesh out a little bit more on this program at later dates. But I actually believe that Donald Trump in some ways is doing it in a calculated way. He is very smart in being able to manipulate the media, very smart in being able to manipulate the actual ideas and stories of the day. Yes, there's no political gain for it, but there's also no political hurt at this particular point in time that we can see. But what it does do is it creates a media distraction. It creates the media to go chase the rabbit down the hole. And I think that might be something we have to continue to look at. Is he utilizing these sorts of ideas and these sorts of tweets and these sorts of proclamations as a way to distract us from what is really going on, whether that be something or nothing? And that's something I think we'll get into. But I do want to say thank you all for joining us today. If you've enjoyed this conversation and you've liked some of our other videos so far, I invite you to hit that subscribe button. I also invite you to leave a comment. Let us know exactly what you thought about this. Join in our conversation. Let us know how you feel, and then maybe we'll even talk about that coming up sometime down the line. Once again, thank you for joining us on the Political Idiots. Have a great day.